This is my game of peace. Cards, cool cards, intriguing mana with dice. I must play. This is deck building. No deck building. New deck. New Phoenixborn. The board games here, they do not feel this itch. Yes, scratch for this Ashes itch. Ashes, I need to play. I just can't look at these all day.
Hey Daniel, do you want to play Ashes?
I have never heard of it, so let's play Yu-Gi-Oh!
Hey, want to play Ashes? Hey, we want to play Ashes? Let's play.
What do I do?
Let's play.
I found it for myself. I knew I could find it. I knew I could. You can call me Ashton. I like Ashes. Ashes Reborn. Well, single player Ashes is now officially unlocked. And co-op too. This is Ashes Reborn Red Reigns, the corpse of Virios, deluxe game mode expansion. This is a lot to say. Let's just call it Ashes Red Reigns. We're also going to be calling it co-op Ashes. Anyways, this has pretty much the same gameplay as normal Ashes, except that you are now facing a monstrosity called a Chimera, which spawns parts of itself to attack you, and even has dice of its own. This box comes with cards to make 4 decks, but you're allowed to use any deck to play against it. We played through the short campaign with pre-constructed Noah, with some slight deck building tweaks according to this box's rules. Then, the rest of the time, we played one-shots using solely pre-constructed decks. The boxes included Jessanani and Brennan, then we went to the core set for Cole, Mioni Viper, and Jessanani. Then we played the expansion deck Nameen Himtide. So these are not every deck in Ashes Reborn, obviously not, holy cow. But we do have some ideas on how all decks fare against the Chimera's mechanisms, and even how deck building could work. Also, if you don't know anything about Ashes Reborn, what are you doing here? Go check out our review on Ashes Reborn over there. This video is not going to make any sense to you if you haven't played Ashes. Anyways, this version of Ashes takes about 30 to 60 minutes, so let's get into it. How to play. Goal is to kill the Chimera, using pretty much the original Ashes rules with some slight tweaks. To bring that HP down to 0, you either attack the Chimera directly and or attack its parts called aspect units, which it spawns on the board. When you kill an aspect, like how you would normally kill a unit, you deal the blood damage to the Chimera, who is treated like a Phoenixborn for all intents and purposes. The Chimera starts with a bunch of these face-down aspects, then on each of its turns, it has a chance to flip over new ones or attack with current ones. But at the same time as this, you also roll a new Chimera die called a Rage die, so let's get into that. If these ever get the red Reigns power symbol, the die is now locked in this slot and doesn't get rolled again. When these 5 slots are filled up, it then gives a red Reigns token, which is real scary. Then the rage all reverts back to basic. When the Chimera gets 3 red raid tokens for solo mode, it triggers its ultimate, doing strong stuff, then upgrading to escalate its behavior. You and the Chimera both pass turns of you doing your normal main and side action, and then the Chimera rolls its d12 and its rage die. When there's no more face down aspects, the Chimera turns become 1 aspect attacking done from left to right. When it can't do that, it's forced to pass and doesn't do anything. You as the human player just pass normally, probably when you ran out of mana to use. When both you and the Chimera are passed, you refresh everything as usual, pass the first player token, and the Chimera restocks its aspects up to its current maximum. Also, you re-roll your mana dice, the Chimera doesn't. Those are the bare basics. You lose by, well, normally losing in Ashes Reborn. Much more soon regarding the new positioning, the intricacies of passing, and also how the Chimera defends itself. Pros! First for components, these dice right here are well made, just like they are in normal Ashes. Now you have these 2 different sides, which are both engraved. The new art also looks beautiful, where you get to see all the Chimera aspects doing something gritty. There's not even any of those generic looking spawn books for the Chimera. The new player cards also keep up the same old Ashes Reborn styled art. I'm really liking the action poses, which have the most color. Then it's cool how they give 2 rulebooks, one for those entirely new to Ashes, and then another for those experienced players. The setup is really easy to follow in each, and there's an updated glossary with different color font for all the new terms, which is awesome. We'll get back to the rulebooks a little bit in the cons though. Now onto gameplay pros, and we have to start by praising how this Chimera works, which is the heart and soul of this expansion. For being a robot, it's generally cool to play around and feeling kind of like a normal human being sometimes. Of course, we have to start on the Rage die, because the way they handled Ash's dice for a co-op is pretty neat. Essentially, it requires really little bookkeeping while still feeling a little bit like Ashes. All it does is slowly ramp up the power symbols, then resets, meaning you don't have to fiddle with manipulating complicated dice mechanics or faces when it's not your turn. Plus, since the dice still have a power side, there's room for all of your abilities where you get to manipulate your opponent's dice. Speaking of dice, the other D12 dice system is good to give some degree of uncertainty that kind of replaces the tension of playing against a human. There's often tension in not being sure if something will do an early attack, but most likely new aspects will flip over for new board states. Now you can't play certain cards with this glare, or maybe the bad guy will ramp up faster through certain rolls. Actually, the Chimera can get a D12 result to downgrade your dice too, just like in normal Ashes. So you can't always be stalling with your own dice and have a guaranteed late round play. The Chimera even uses the D12 to defend. If you're going to attack one of its aspects, there's a slight chance it blocks for it. This chance of blocking for units is just like what a normal Phoenixborn player would do. What's more is that playing with the Chimera somewhat gives you the feeling of manipulating your mana based off of your opponent. See, if you ever pass while they have a face down aspect, one of their Rage die gets advanced. Ooh. So just like normal Ashes, you don't want to blow all your mana at once, you want to ration it carefully, otherwise you're just sitting there flailing while your opponent keeps getting advantage on you. It's a neat exercise here because the Chimera always starts each round with the full board, and it's up to you to time how to spend mana to deal with all of its threats, keeping track of everything that either hasn't been flipped face up, or how much of a threat the face up ones are if they attack. It's like having a full board of aspects at the start of each round is the AI equivalent of having 10 mana to spend in the original game. But you also have to play around how the Chimera progresses. See, it gets a red Reigns token for each face-up aspect still alive at the end of the round. So then you're often debating whether or not to kill aspects to do a little bit of damage because of the blood value or just attacking the Chimera directly. Add in how there's a limit on how many aspects the Chimera can have, and sometimes you want to keep some of their cards face up and alive on the board so that your team knows this is a known threat for the next round. And then this may make the Chimera pass faster on the next round because now there's less face down aspects, and the Chimera only rolls a d12 when it has face down aspects. It's a cool balance of how many red reigns you're willing to give up through letting aspects survive and playing the entire game generally slower, because playing too slowly means there's more rounds before the game ends, meaning the Chimera has more time to ramp up its dice through rolling d12s. It's especially important early to mid-game to note when the first and second ultimate are triggering, because they do first 1 damage to your entire board and then 2 damage to your entire board. So if you don't play this correctly, you could get board wiped hard. And you want to slow down the Chimera in general because each behavior card and board limit for them gets harsher, and the last ultimate just floods you with units. Oh, wait a second. Since the Chimera gets red reigns from the 5 rage dice, hey, yeah, choosing to demote dice, as we said earlier in the pros, is a way to slow down this guy. More new stuff comes in the form of positioning. It's now a kind of mini game which requires you to keep track of the rows of everything. They'll either attack your Phoenixborn directly or your left or rightmost unit. So now whenever you play units, you actually have to worry about placement. You do some board manipulation, like rushing spawns of weak units to act as meat shields, and or letting you disregard certain aspects if you position correctly. But I know not everyone is getting this for solo play, so how's the teamwork in the 2-player mode? It's pretty good. You can always attack the aspects on your teammate's field, and they can attack your aspects. So it's often a lot of discussion about which aspects you're focusing. It's especially good to kill those defender aspects that block for the Chimera and other aspects when either player attacks. For every turn, you get to pick what order you and your teammate do your main and side actions, which undoubtedly sparks some conversation.
He's only 1-4 right now, he's not strong enough.
That's still pretty good there.
Oh, and also there's not really quarterbacking due to how the Ashes system is. Like, you're not really gonna scrutinize their mana and then their cards in hand because you have to worry about all that stuff on your board as well. It's quite a bit if you know what I'm saying if you played Ashes. And we have to talk about the new cards. So you get 4 pre-built Phoenixborn decks that are made from a pool of 39 cards. Basically, you pick one of these reprinted Phoenixborn that are exactly the same except for some new flavor text, take 3 of their unique cards, and then take all the rest of the generic cards for a deck. This means that if you just came from playing the base set, you're getting a whole new way to play Jessanani. She can play time with enemy units to lower their attack. You'll take a little bit of damage whenever they do something, but when they die, your opponent gets this blood-sucking useless blood puppet. Or you can use my favorite card in this set, the Blood Puppeteer, which spawns a blood puppet on your board. Then when this puppeteer dies, you send that puppet over to the Chimera. Or if you like Cole, his new final stand rewards him for emptying his hand to do 4 damage. This gets even better if Cole's close to dying. How epic. All 4 of these decks ask for 10 black ceremonial die, which is a good choice of dice power since it encourages meditating and lets you combo harder. Like, you can combo stuff by letting your allies die because you're okay with retrieving them later, then spawning this included Bone Raven as a side action. Or how there's emphasis on taking a bunch of wounds through these equip cards and these units, then you can unload on the Chimera through Blood Brawl, which wipes their board for each wound on your units. Wow, what a play. Wound management is really the name of the game here. Of course, you're not limited to just these 4 included decks, since you can technically use any deck in Ashes Reborn to fight against the Chimera. But there's varying levels of matchup success we'll get into in the cons. Thank goodness the game includes these generic channel magic cards if you want to ever easily swap out anything from a pre-constructed deck, because man, this channel magic is so versatile. This is all blending into replayability pros, so let's start with the included campaign mode, which is actually the recommended way to play. You play against the Chimera once. If you win, you start it at level 2 the next time you play against it. If you beat that one, then when you play it for the final mission of the campaign, you start at the level 3. This doesn't sound the most flashy, but the Chimera starting at a different level really does ramp up the difficulty. Higher levels means more aspects and stronger behavior. They can now start the game in pinking your units off a die roll. This means that the campaign gets more frantic the deeper you get into it, with the last level actually being really freaking hard to beat. It's pretty cool that you can change up your dice loadout in between these levels too. You can run the Chimera with its 2 decks, the Shadow and Fear ones, so technically there's more replay value here, but back to these decks in the cons. The final pro is that this runs true to time. I mean, kind of, like this doesn't have an included playtime on the box, but if we take the Ashes Reborn playtime and scale it accordingly, it works out. The solo mode is about 30 minutes or so when comfortable, and the 2-player mode is about an hour. Cons! We were praising these 2 rulebooks a lot, but you know what's really odd? They're way different from each other in not a good way. You would assume that reading either of them all the way through would get you to the point where you would understand how to play this game with whatever prior knowledge of Ashes you have, but that's not really the case. The Veteran rulebook is actually the main rulebook, which shows an actual component list and clarifies questions at the back, whereas the other rulebook is like a supplementary complete rules reference. But then it is the most legit way to find out how to use the included decks? Sure, these included decks are technically talked about in the Veteran rulebook, but that paragraph is extremely lacking, and I'm sure most are going to go to the other rulebook to find out how to build the included decks. I kid you not, I completely forgot about these new cards and decks until I was knee deep into this review. Saw this info in the beginner rulebook and was like, shoot, okay, looks like I have to try those now. More weird stuff is that the Veteran rulebook only shows the 2-player setup in the visual, but doesn't even discuss how to operate the actual 2-player mode. It only talks about a semi-co-op 2-player variant that has a chance for the good guy team to turn on itself. So then you have to go to the other rulebook for actual 2-player. Why not have this playing with 2 players page in the Veteran rulebook? Okay, so how it actually works is that the Veteran rulebook is like the real solo rulebook to help you jump right in with your own decks, completely streamlined. Whereas if you know nothing about Ashes or want to play 2-player or want to use the decks in the set, you'll find yourself using this bigger booklet more. This distinction should have been made way more clear, with especially a table of contents in each, with them referring to key concepts in the other booklet when applicable. But you know what neither of these talk about well? One of the key mechanics in this game, the Chimera Rage Dice. So it explains what Rage Dice are building towards, but never goes into the firm explanation that the power symbol goes inside of the slot and never gets moved afterwards. I mean, just show the thing going into the slot. Thanks to the guys at Team Covenant for actually explaining how this works. Then a lot of the new Chimera stuff has some pretty poor visibility that is especially going to hurt 2-player games. The almighty ultimate card and behaviors are just lines of text which are really small. If they're going to have all this text, why not make this card bigger? After all, the ultimate and behavior are the biggest thing to worry about during the Chimera's turn, and the aspects which have the same size text are closer to each player. Also, why isn't this red rain symbol listed as a symbol on the cards? It's very odd that they decided to say red rains all the time when they had this awesome symbol to use. Lastly, it is just kind of inherent that when a dueling card game meant for 2 opponents now becomes a 3-player-ish game, some of the cross-court visibility is not great. Now for gameplay cons, I want to start with bringing attention to one specific card, Lurk. This is a tier 2 aspect that always hits first in combat and can never be targeted by any of your abilities or attacks. Yeah, this being 4 damage is a ridiculously strong threat, and even the included pre-constructed decks have difficulty dealing with it. There's a singular niche way to kill it involving this golem that I won't really get into the specifics of, so yeah, technically it is possible to kill it, but this is a pretty specific play. Ashes Reborn is otherwise filled with targeting abilities, so this lurk just mostly ends up staying on the field, which may be intentional, and you do have an efficient way to throw meat shields at it with this puppeteer, but this doesn't lead to particularly dynamic boards and engaging gameplay there. It is usually just a giant presence aspect that wipes out your leftmost unit every turn for the rest of the game. If you happen to get 2 or even 3 of them flipped fairly early on, the game becomes very hard. It doesn't cost the Chimera any more mana to flip over this virtually invincible guy. This is a bigger problem for some of the precon decks like Mioni, Jessanani, and Saria Goodman, who have 0 way to take care of this. Oh, and Noah too, but I'm pretty sure no one plays this pre-constructed deck. This leaves Cole and Eradriel, which can take care of Lurk no problem. Eradriel, she can do so a little more with 2 cards. 4 out of the 6 core decks not having an answer to Lurk is more irritating because you have to use 1 deck not included in this box if you play 2-player, and if you choose a ROM precon, you're just flailing against Lurk. Now we gotta talk about how this expansion handles randomness for the Ashes Reborn system, which traditionally prides itself on randomness mitigation. So typically for each of the Chimera turns, it rolls a d12, and then you pick one of the options on this table here. This system sounds okay until you realize that some results are just straight up better than others. This means that it's entirely possible to get really weird games where the Chimera is insanely strong. Like you roll a bunch of high numbers, especially early on, because remember that the more red range tokens it gets, the stronger the Chimera becomes. So there's a snowball effect going on. If you're playing a deck that really needs to be set up early, you can be utterly bomb blasted by the Chimera getting its ultimate too quickly, since that's a guaranteed free damage to anything, again without the Chimera spending anything. The 12 being a 5x strength compared to rolling a 10 to 11 is really quite something. You're hoping so hard you don't roll the 12 at all, especially in the first couple of rolls. Then the Chimera also has a result that will flip an aspect and attack with it right away. Sure, this is a shakeup in the board, but kind of unfair in the traditionally grounded Ashes system because that type of play is typically the strength of 2 main actions to spawn and then attack. It can be almost unfair to be suddenly blown up by this area effect attack, or this one that grants red range tokens after killing something. This isn't a groundbreaking con by any means, and there's usually not weird results that come up with the Chimera, but we have to keep this in the cons because this is Ashes, and people are usually playing this game because of how grounded its randomness is. Maybe having some way to account for the tier 2 cards being flipped over, or maybe just axing the 12 result entirely, at least on the first behavior, would be a nice step. Or you could even get rid of the d12 entirely and just make the monster behavior like a deck of cards, like in Gloomhaven or Frosthaven. The next con is also not too severe, but it's an umbrella where the replayability in this set may not be as good as initially thought. Let's start with deck building. It's a bit weird. See, if you deck build specifically against the Chimera, and if you get big monsters that the Chimera never voluntarily targets because of its positioning system, then you're gonna find games probably too easy. But if you deck build normally, then play against the Chimera, you might find some Ashes Reborn isms not to be a fit. Trying to mostly burn down the Chimera has been off at every attempt, mostly because the Chimera has 30 health instead of about under 20 for a normal Phoenixborn. The Chimera has more HP because it's designed to also tank the blood damage from its aspects dying. You can win through some type of burning, especially with the included Jessanani deck, which has big attackers to supplement burning damage. I would warn against playing the core deck of Jessanani against the Chimera. Any hard removal that we've seen in the base set isn't that good either, because the Chimera never loads up on certain units. Usually area effect is the best. Cheap removal, a little too good here. Negation cards just aren't that good, because you know what the Chimera is typically going to do from face-up cards. You can't negate its ultimate, and the Chimera never surprises you from cards dropped from hand. Look, I haven't tested how every single reaction spell works against the Chimera, and I'm not sure how successful milling as a mechanic is against its 18 card deck that never meditates, but the fact is that how this robot is created is that there's going to be some deck building limitations. Again, this is not a big deal and can get improved with further expansions, but could be a buzzkill if you're looking to seriously deck build against a robot. Also, if we look at the Chimera decks, there's the Fury and Shadow ones, with 3 copies of each card, and these don't really play that much differently than one another and definitely don't follow a cohesive theme. They both have blocking cards, both have status effects to make the Chimera stronger, and then some big attackers. Oh, and then the one with Lurk is harder. Once you play against one of these decks once, you pretty much know all the tricks. But technically again, you can use any Ashes Reborn deck, even the pre-constructed ones, against the Chimera, with varying matchup difficulty. We're gonna guess that most matchups are gonna be somewhat winnable with the right rolls and plays, but again, let me know in the comments. All the 4 included pre-constructed decks, which borrow each other's cards, definitely seem well equipped to deal with the Chimera from the Brennan and just Anani runs that we did. And again, Channel Magic exists to kind of breathe new life into base decks, but again, you're only changing 3 cards out, and Channel Magic has to be a little more generic in being so splashable. The final con has to do with the box, like it's kinda shoddy. It's like one of those old PC games. It's not the worst quality, but we're irritated on how they couldn't make this an actual box that opens normally. Like, look at this other expansion for Ashes. This came in an actual nice box. Scoring! Now it's time for a recommended score on Ashes Reborn's Red Rains, the corpse of Veros, where we try to critically evaluate the aforementioned pros and cons, with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. And so, this is gonna get a 7 out of 10. It is good. Remember all the cons we were just talking about? Yeah, most of those aren't really gonna matter for those looking for a nice cooperative Ashes time. This is at least a couple of polished matchups, including the 4 included decks against an enemy that takes a lot of the tense ideas from the head-to-head and puts it into a slightly less intense 30-minute game if played solo. In fact, if you're the type that doesn't care about deck building, you could find the new, more melting pot style pre-con decks to be a quick way to combine old ideas. How about Cole now using a blood puppet, or Jessanani spawning huge golems? Then if you're feeling particularly adventurous, you can vary it up slightly with the campaign mode, and then try for the Wild West in balance with deck building. If you do the math and combining this with the base game, you're getting at least 10 unique decks to play against each of the 2 aspect decks. Of course, you have to worry about Lurk as a card, but that's at least 20 different plays. We do have some unanswered questions because of how expansive Ashes Reborn is in terms of mechanics, like, is milling even a viable strategy? Do you have time for milling on solo play at harder difficulties? Should there have been more deck building restrictions given how this Chimera actually works? How easy does the game actually get if you use a real competitively tuned Ashes Reborn deck? But hey, even for the most experienced of Ashes players, this serves as an accessible training mode to try out completely new decks and starting hands. Cause speaking from personal experience, I have a ton of unused decks I would like to try before getting embarrassed in front of a friend. For 2 players, it's also a pretty cool fit if you and a buddy both liked playing the original Ashes, but weren't really too into the versus gameplay, whether it be for the high conflict nature of the game or because of the intensity of it. For those who love the intensity and methodical nature of Ashes Reborn, this is far from a replacement, but it's not trying to be. After all, there's no mind games, and now you don't have to worry about your opponent's 10 mana, which got simplified into their aspect availability and rage dice. The Chimera isn't trying to do anything sneaky to counterplay you, which could be relieving for some. For $40 MSRP and with our slight reservations, we can't call this great yet, but we definitely applaud it and recommend it. If you're concerned at how it doesn't target your stronger monsters, well, you can just crank up the difficulty. Oh, and then it's kind of weird how you literally have everything in this box to create a standalone game, except for those 10 black ceremonial dice. But hey, dice are more expensive to make than cards. Anyways, we're curious to see what comes next for co-op Ashes in the future, because really curious to see what happens in the new aspect decks. My personal score for co-op Ashes is going to be a 7 out of 10. I have a good time with it. So for reference, I rated the normal Ashes Reborn when I made that video about 2 years ago an 8 out of 10. And I've since then played this game about 5 to 6 times, and it's still great. I still have an 8 out of 10 time with it. In fact, even after writing this co-op Ashes script, I played the normal Ashes one more time on TTS to make sure I really enjoyed it. I still found myself impressed and enjoying the importance of playing around rounds with the multi-leveled mana. Then there's the cool Phoenixborn personalities, and the board states are just rife with mind games that keep me super hooked. I almost always feel like I have to think very creatively to eke out wins. Co-op Ashes has about half of those aspects. Like, you still get to manage your cool decks with the cool round management. But then the board states just don't come to as nearly as interesting or as intense. So yeah, while it is way more accessible for my life, it doesn't hit the same 2-player highs, and that's acceptable. Like, if I can't maintain a board and the Chimera is on stage 2 or 3, I basically lose because of its guaranteed spawns. If I have a good board and there's no threat of an ultimate to wipe me out, I'm usually probably gonna win. This is kind of the issue of many co-op games for me, that at some point I just know I'm going to win because the robot operates very predictably. After all, there's no enemy hand to worry about, and the opponent is never doing the cool Ashes stuff like specifically eyeing my mana or trying to ramp up a huge monster. So sometimes I'm just going through the motions without much tension, but heck, I'm still fairly entertained for these couple of ending rounds, even after 10 playthroughs of co-op Ashes, just because I like the Ashes system so much. Oh, and then screw Precon Noah, I finally got to test it myself for the campaign, and man, he is such a slog. I feel so bad for everyone who had to play Ashes for the first time and thought he was cool and picked him, and then didn't like Ashes. My situation with the original Ashes Reborn since I reviewed it is A, not having enough time to play it, and B, the friends I want to play it with want to play other card games instead. They claim that the Ashes deck building isn't that nuanced, which I cannot really personally talk about, but maybe? Let me know. So then this single player Ashes is a cool compromise and will ultimately serve as a training grounds for the 2-player game so I can get my real Ashes fix in. I mean, also just like look at all these unplayed expansions that we've been sent. Shout out to the guy who sent us these expansions. You are freaking awesome, man. So yeah, with these, I'll likely get another game of Ashes co-op going again sometime soon. And hopefully more thoughts about Ashes Reborn as a whole in my top 10 video to be released later this year. Thanks for watching the video. Yeah, this game just randomly appeared in our PO box, so that didn't affect scoring. And thank you to our patrons for making videos like this possible. Bam, 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 bam. Yeah, let me know what Ashes deck I should be playing too. Like, so many things to try. We also got our Man That's a Cardboard over here. Thank you guys so much, and that's the video. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know more about your Ashes experience. Later.